One of them wanted to be the security guy. He claimed he was a security guy.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Security Guy Radio. Brian, what's with the theme music there? A little skipping? What was that? Did you bump the needle?
Vinyl. He's brought one of those vinyls.
Well, Brian is a music aficionado, and a young lad is he, but he kind of digs the vinyl stuff. And I think he must have played that on an old vinyl record. With the needle? Is that what you did? Because digital music does not skip during a live radio show. Is that correct?
That was me loading up the other sounds. I'm sorry.
I see. Okay. That's all right. No problem. No problem. You're still a cool guy, dude. Well, welcome, Paul.
And you. Welcome, Chuck.
Chuck Harold. What was I last week? Chuck the Chin Harold, and you were Paul
Tally-ho Bristow, which I still am.
I still like that.
Actually.
Paul Tally-ho Bristow. So what's going on? Anything on the weekend? Anything happen exciting?
No, but I was very pleased last week to see that Jim McDonald had announced that he was running for LA Sheriff.
Oh, that's
so
fantastic.
I think we're going to support him as much as we can.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Good. He is a good guy.
Very good guy.
For those that don't know, he's currently chief of Long Beach.
I think
was LAPD.
I think we'd better for him to go outside instead of go inside with the internal sheriff.
Do you want a quick Jim McDonald story that I had?
I suppose we do.
So I was in Boston on my travels one time, and if anybody's ever been to Boston, there's a bunch of one-way systems. You can never find your way out, and they were doing construction, and I was driving around, couldn't get back on the freeway. Finally found a copper and started to talk to him, and he was standing in front of this construction in the freeway, and he saw that I was wearing an LAPD shirt, which I do for protection, right? And he said, "Do you know Jim McDonald?" Because he used to be out in Boston. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I love Jim McDonald." And then he escorted me through all the construction and onto the freeway so that I could get where I was going. So Jim McDonald actually probably saved me from driving around for another 3 hours
if I
in
wore
Boston.
an LAPD shirt, I'd have a cap busted in my ass or something. So
Well, LAPD with the accent, you sort of get away with it.
I think it's your accent. I think that's the entire thing.
Yeah, but that's my Jim McDonald story.
I can't put on an Irish accent, unfortunately, because your Irish accents beat the British accents every time, of course.
Oh, yeah.
The chicks dig them.
Yeah, and Scottish.
Scottish, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to have a discussion kind of following what we did before for this month, which is Stalker Awareness Month, but this is going to segue into workplace violence, which could include a stalker, of course, right? But I think we want to get down to something that's really kind of specialized for you and me, because at Fox and Disney, we have both had these databases, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, of stalkers, which translate sometimes into workplace violence.
Yeah.
And for many, many years, people didn't know what to do about it. And for many, many years on the radio and the TV, people said, well, you just can't predict when somebody's going to do something.
They got to go off.
And you always said, and I always said, bollards or bullocks or whatever. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
It's nonsense, right? Because there are incident indicators, there's background information, and things like that. So I think it's important to get this out to the general public, to get it out to the soccer moms and the professionals at the same time, to let them know that there are things you can do, because workplace extends from the office, the studio, the house.
Absolutely.
The house is the workplace for a family, right? And you can have the same issues. So we're super duper fortunate today to have what I think is probably the top guy in the field on that.
I believe so. Absolutely.
Mr. Patrick
so he
Prince.
tells you anyway.
That's
Mr.
right.
Patrick Prince. Welcome, Mr. Patrick Prince.
My pleasure.
Now, I'm going to read this because I can't remember it, but it's a little long intro, but I want everybody to understand that Mr. Prince is the genuine article.
Yeah.
He's the guy, right? So Patrick is with Prince & Phelps Consultants. It's a corporate training and management consulting partnership specializing in workplace violence. And what's kind of unique is, unlike many other consultants in that field who study cases, in other words, it's academic, they read about the case and they say, well, I would have done this and so on. Pat and his partner have actually been out in the field and on the ground and with the troops and in the trenches actually consulting on real cases. And they've done over 1,500 cases of threatening situations or acts of violence in the workplace, and there are a wide array of situations ranging from hostile intimidation, harassment, verbal threats to physical assaults, active sabotage, felony stalking, discharging firearms in the workplace, and some on-the-job homicides. they were the principal responders to several incidents, which you've all heard about, including the workplace violence homicides at the United States Post Office Dana Point, that was 93, the City of Los Angeles Piper Tech Center, 1995, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Port of L.A., 1998, City of L.A. Bureau of Fleet Services, 2005. Now, in addition to this, what's really significant, and Pat, you're going to get into this right away, is that he's federally certified as a drug recognition expert. And I think I was a DRE at Culver City back in the day. It was not as high end, but it's a super important component because he's also a reserve officer with LAPD and has served as an instructor with the DRE program since 1997. He also instructs LAPD's narcotics schools and other specialized training. And he's recognized as an expert in the articulation and application of reasonable cause for workplace drug testing. Trained over 10,000 supervisors, right?
Lots and lots.
Lots.
That's a lot.
And over 12,000 employees have attended drug awareness. And the reason I spent some extra time on that is because as we go on this discussion, you're going to understand how important your workplace violence program, how important it is to have your workplace violence program include drug recognition, drug testing, things like that. So after that, I'm exhausted. Welcome, Pat.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for
It's good to
coming
be
on
here.
the show. So today I thought we would kind of break this down into some components. Let's talk about where workplace violence was, where it's gone, and where it's going. I mean,
Great. Well, we've seen a lot of movement. Actually, you know what? I want to jump back to where y'all were last week. Many people don't realize this. 40% of workplace homicides are really domestic violence cases coming to the workplace.
40%.
When you started off talking about stalking, and then if some people try to put a line between stalking, domestic violence in the workplace, they're fooling themselves. So the transition from stalking to workplace violence is dynamic. It's huge. And frankly, that's where many of the folks in my line of business, we got our start. I was very fortunate. I got my start back in the early 90s. I was doing what we were calling trauma response. I was working mostly with electrical utilities, and we would assist companies when there was a fatal accident. And the 80s was a really tough decade for a lot of our electrical utilities. And we were doing death notifications. We were having to notify women their husbands were dead and try to figure out how do we restore services, how to get people back on their feet. And then one of the utilities I was consulting with had an employee murdered on the job in early 93. And that forced us to not only then provide assistance to his family, but it forced us to ask ourselves, what is this thing called workplace violence? How is it somebody comes to work and doesn't go home end a shift? And we 20 years later, we read the paper, we watch stuff on TV, but it's still remarkable.
Yeah.
Conceptually, somebody doesn't go home because of another person's intentional behavior. Fascinating. Horrific, really. I think what was maybe the big point and maybe the turning point in my career was only a few months after that homicide, there was a shooting at the Dana Point Post Office.
Yeah.
And I was asked to come and assist the Postal Service. I spent weeks and weeks working with the management team and the employees, and we were really forced to look at workplace violence. And subsequent to that, everyone hopefully is aware the post office has really done some remarkable things in developing their
Yeah, there hasn't
internal
been a shooting with a postal.
Well, you know, that
worker
was
for a
kind of the
long time,
90s thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Well,
going postal, right? Going
There's the
postal.
term.
and not
Yeah.
fair because they had no higher an incident of shooters than other.
No, they had. Actually, there's one
Catchy phrase, though.
Yeah, one
It is,
particular
isn't it?
news team that liked me. I was on fairly often in the early 90s until they asked me, so what's wrong with these postal employees? And I wasn't willing to throw them under the bus because, frankly, I didn't think they deserved any more discredit than anybody else. It's horrific. They'd gone through enough. I never got invited back.
Oh.
So it's good enough. But we
that's
started.
the news business for
It
you.
is. But we started to really pay attention, and we didn't have many tools back then. Even if we were to go back and look at my first big shooting, the Dana Point, it was actually a stalking case. A fellow named Mark Hilbin was stalking a female coworker named Kimberly Springer. We hear about labor management. We heard about it certainly there. It was a stalking case.
Yeah, I don't think most people realized that it was a stalking case.
No, we
Thought it was a crazy employee. That's it.
that's right. And mind you, he had problems.
Right.
He was a poor employee.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge was back in 1993. Most employers only had one or two tools. Let's see, we had fitness for duty evaluations,
Yep.
and we had admin leave. We could put people off. Absent those, companies didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
The sad thing was the post office did both of those, but those weren't enough. They needed to have a plan B, I guess. And I don't think that they were inadequate in what they did. They did the best they knew how. We were inadequate in helping them.
Was
And so-
termination not one of the tools for him? He was reluctant?
Again, how do we translate aberrant behavior into actionable conduct on the in the workplace? Frankly, actually, what you're bringing up is a huge issue. If we start to go back, as you said in your opening comments, and pay attention to behavior, what we find is that we probably could have taken job action. We probably can take some sort of intervention with many of the folks that just continue to get worse and then act out, that what we find is often maybe years earlier, they were doing stuff. They were creating fear, they were creating distress, and they weren't really sure what to do. And when I first started with the Department of Agriculture after a shooting that we helped them with in 1998, I heard the federal government does two kinds of evaluations for their employees. They do performance evaluations and conduct. And I thought that was the screwiest thing until I really started thinking about it. It's not just how skilled somebody is. How do they conduct themselves? What's their conduct? How do they interact with others? How well do they do the things that they do? And many companies fall into the trap. If they're skilled, they're good. But if they're scaring their coworkers, they're not interacting well. They're doing all those other kinds of things that we now accept as warnings or flags or whatever we're going to call them. We can do something there, and that's, I think, one of the more significant contributions we've been making is let's do something early. Don't wait until it's abundantly obvious that we can take action.
Right. Is weird a terminable offense?
And in many cases, weird is not.
Weird
Thank
is
God,
not.
Paul, right? Paul, I don't know Paul would have a job anywhere.
Although we are doing a radio show, so possibly there's some kind of correlation there. But no, I see what you're saying. I mean, a job action, everybody's worried about getting sued, and they're worried about, what's going to happen. But if the guy is an excellent worker and proficient at his job, but he wears weird T-shirts, people are going to look the other way and say, well, he's okay, we'll leave him alone, when they should be really looking at the web of circumstances and all his behavior.
You bet. And it's not just the T-shirts. It's the, let's see. Do y'all remember, and I didn't work the case, I was in Hawaii when it happened, the young fellow committed the acts of murder for Xerox. And he killed, I think, 9 of his coworkers. What was interesting was they had years of stuff leading up to it where he would, when he'd go to a client's business, he'd sit in a chair and stare into space. They'd have to call up Xerox and say, you need to call your guy in. He was hard to be around. There was rumors, eventually things came out later, that he would go to the range, and most of us that have guns like to shoot. We see somebody at the range who's got a lot of guns and they're proficient. We like them.
Yeah.
Other people at the range stayed away from him. He made them uncomfortable. When you make folks at the range uncomfortable, when you scare clients, it's a clue.
It's a clue.
It's a clue. And so, was he technically proficient? It appears so. Was he a quote-unquote good employee? No way. And I think what we go back and look at the cases I've worked, the cases we read about, there were opportunities for HR to intervene. There were opportunities for management to do something rather than wait and wait and wait.
What do you think about sort of fitness for duty examinations? Because I've always been concerned about that.
I've got two major issues with. First of all, I don't like them off the top of my head.
Yeah.
They are a tool with very limited application. Here's the problem. A fitness for duty evaluation is asking whether or not a person is fit. Do they have the ability, medically, psychologically, to perform the essential function of the job? And I don't want to diminish anybody's job, but look at what we're doing. We're talking to microphones.
Yeah.
This isn't hard.
Yeah.
Now, whether we actually do it or not is another issue. The sad truth about fitness for duty is that most people who are evaluated on fitness for duty are going to be found fit. Or they're going to be found fit with some restrictions. My favorite of all time, somebody was sent, he was scaring his coworkers, he's sent off the job. He was returned to work with 2 restrictions. No contact with the public and no contact with supervision. Oh, it's a dream job, first of all. I want that job. That it didn't serve the employer. He is psychologically able to do the job means nothing as far as whether or not the person's dangerous. So the challenge we have is that was the only tool we had in the workplace for many years. We used it. It was a very poor tool. I actually worked a shooting where a fellow was causing concern, was sent off the job for fitness for duty. I was called in because he'd come in and committed multiple homicides, killed a number of his coworkers and some people outside the job. During our recovery efforts. As we were working and helping the company out, the manager took me in his office and said, look at this. He showed me a letter from the psychiatrist that they'd sent him to saying he was fit for duty, should return to work. He was able to do the job. Means nothing on whether they're dangerous. So quite frankly, I'm not a big fan of fitness for duty. The second issue, it often tends to medicalize bad behavior. There's no excuse for bad behavior. Don't medicalize it.
Interesting, medicalize. That's a very interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, we try not to medicalize it. If they're not performing well, let's take action. If they're performing fine, then we let them work.
Yeah.
Hold
But,
that thought,
yeah,
Pat.
you
We'll
bet.
be back in a few minutes on Security Guy Radio.
Okay, Trevor, where's the Big Dipper?
Over there.
Trevor's a space whiz.
And he's battling a brain tumor. He came to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, where our pioneering research helps save kids with brain tumors across America.
How many stars are there?
That's easy.
1, 2.
Get out of here.
Give thanks for the healthy kids in your life and give to those who are not. Donate now at stjude.org or shop wherever you see our magnifying glass.
5 billion one,
5 million two.
Good morning there, Ruckus. What's going down with you?
It's Pep and Dre of the Real Sports Dogs here at Adrenaline Radio. Catch our show
Every Saturday morning.
9 to 10 on Adrenaline Radio, 1680 AM.
That's family-friendly programming.
It's a sports wrap. Put a bow on the week that was in sports. Sports banner at its finest.
Coming to you live every Saturday, 9 to 10. That's the Paperboy crew here on Adrenaline Radio.
Wings!
Thanks for asking, but I'd rather not send you nude pictures. I'm camera shy. I already said no. Under my clothes, I'm a robot. My webcam is broken. I'm worried they'll get passed around school. I have a rash. I have nudophobia. I have lizard skin. I'm a vampire, so I don't show up in pictures anyways. Your badgering has really killed the mood.
When someone is pressuring you to do something you don't want to, how many ways can you say no before they get the message? Let us know at that'snotcool.com. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Just a sec.
Hey, ready to go? What? There's a swarm of locusts flying just around you.
No, there isn't.
What?
Okay, yeah, there is. You ready to go?
I didn't even know there were locusts in this part of the world.
I know. I was busy throwing rocks at stuff, and then swarm of locusts.
Maybe the universe is trying to tell you something.
I tried bug spray, but it just made them mad, and the fumes made me sick.
Sounds like bad karma. Maybe you should volunteer. Help a little old lady across the street, something. Get your karma right.
Karma? Alright, that's just dumb.
Ow! Stay on the universe's good side. Volunteer, vote, get involved, and get yourself to getgoodkarma.org. Getgoodkarma.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hello, this is Rod Stewart for RAD. Your lifestyle is your business, but when you drive drunk, you become everybody's business. Don't drink and drive. Be smart, plan ahead, and choose a designated driver. Remember, music lives, and so should you.
A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Transportation, RAD, the National Association of Broadcasters, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Security Guy Radio with Chuck Harold,
Paul Tally-ho Bristow.
Paul Tally-ho Bristow.
I would have gone for cheers.
I'm going to try and come up with a different nickname every show. That's what y'all
I'm going to stick with that one. I like it.
All right, we're talking to Pat Prince, the guy in workplace violence assessment. We were just talking in the previous segment about kind of the history of workplace violence, how people thought they couldn't do anything about it. HR would wait till the threshold of behavior got to a point where it was outrageous, and then they'd start thinking about doing something about it, and they either put them on a fitness for duty or leave. I mean, there wasn't much else they could do, right?
And I'm not a big fan of putting somebody off on paid leave. If you want to pay somebody to stay home, pay me to stay home.
But I have found, though, in our cases, when I say termination, we don't always terminate people because they're going to be workplace violence, but let's say they're a little weird, they're a little eccentric. But you know what? Paying a guard couple $100 for the week to transition into another job, because a guard can get a job in about a day.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're paying them for 2 or 3 days, and it mitigates some of that problem, I found that is.
Do you not find it gives you a little bit of wiggle room now? Just a little bit of.
Yeah, how we let people
cushion,
go. Yeah, one of the things on my resume, and it's not real highlighted, but I've worked with a number of folks on what we call hostile terminations. And some folks need to be terminated for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
Poor performance, unwillingness to work well with others. I mean, there's a bunch of things. When I often get a call from a client, I think they worry that I'm going to say, well, don't terminate them. If somebody deserves it, we need to take admin action. But a lot of it goes back to how we do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't mind throwing a couple weeks worth of pay at somebody if it eases them. We can debate whether they deserve it or not, but whether it makes the company safer or not is cheap.
And that's what it's
It's
all
cheap.
about in the end, right?
That's right. That's all that. Yeah.
And each case is individual. Literally.
They really are. And sometimes we just walk them right to their car. Sometimes we make a little softer landing. We try to understand what is in the safety's best interest, if you will.
Yeah.
The worst termination I had was I was doing consulting for, let's just say, a big postal meter company. And the guy we're going to terminate knew he was getting terminated. He came to work. And for some reason, the hair on the back of my neck said, I got to check this guy's trunk. I didn't check it when he came in. I should have. But we saw him coming from the parking lot. But as he's leaving, I said, you got to check your trunk. Make sure he didn't take anything. Full of automatic weapons. I'm talking rifles, 2 or 3 rifles, shotguns, and that was a prime lesson in looking at these people and saying, you know what, you never know what you're going to get. You got to be careful, and you got to treat them all the same way.
I actually assisted a company up in Northern California. It was a fella who it was in a represented union environment, and so they had some reluctance. Although we went to the union and said, look, he's engaged in this behavior. He was the guy who's sitting in the lunchroom, and out of the blue one day he says, you know what? If I was to come in here and shoot everybody, you know how I'd do it? And he says, I'd sit on the the bridge across the street, and I have a scope, I could pick you off. And he started naming who he'd shoot first, who he'd shoot second. And that's a little inappropriate.
Yeah.
And then as they started looking into it, somebody went to HR with that, and then they found out, well, you know what? He'd had years of staring people down, making the finger like a gun when they walked through his area. So we actually approached the business agent for the union. It was a big union. And he says, well, we'll represent him. But the only discussion I've had, this is a business agent, he said, I came in one day and said, hey, nice to see you as one of our members. I never see you at the meetings. And the guy says, the only time you'll see me at a union meeting is when I come in to kill you all.
So did the union hire you?
Yeah. So he says that to management. He says it to his coworkers. Says union, and so we needed it to help him out of the company.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the famous line from the Terminator, "I'll be back."
Yeah.
And I use that for training.
Yeah.
Really, a cyborg walks in your police lobby, says he's going to be back, and you don't take him seriously. I mean, you have to treat those statements as real. You just have to. You can't do nothing about it. Right. So let's go back. We have the 90s. We have people getting shot right and left. All kinds of things are happening. And HR and legal are sitting around with their thumbs going, well, I'm not sure we can fire people. What changed? How did it get to a point where now we can do some evaluations? Now we can take some action because nothing happened for a long time.
Well, I think what we did is we stopped medicalizing it, first of all.
Okay.
We stopped saying that it is acceptable conduct given their condition, whatever that is. And then, fortunately, the United States Supreme Court has agreed, and it's been a few years since their last major ruling on this, but there's no excuse for bad behavior. If we as corporations focus on the behavior, if we as threat assessors focus on the behavior, what we can do is start to understand that there is action available to us. You briefly talked about it in an intro. Go back and look at drug testing. My partner and I, we went back and we looked at about 100 of our cases. We looked at a fairly narrow time frame. And then we pulled out the files, and it looked to us, in probably 55-60% of our caseload in that one time frame, had the employer drug tested for cause, they wouldn't have called us. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's easier to take action on an employee for a positive drug test than they're scaring the heck out of their coworkers.
Well, right. It's easier to fire somebody for lying about an investigation than for the actual thing you're investigating them for. There's always a different way to do it that's easier and better, really.
You bet.
Yeah, so let's talk about drug tests. I mean, what do we have, Paul? We had about a 10-12% failure rate when we were testing for, let's just call it the biggest event in Hollywood, 500 people, 500 guards. Oh, 10% would fail. You think that might be low compared to some other?
Frankly, I think, again, everything changes. we go back and look at some of the 80s and 90s research and into the early 2000s, I think of some of the companies were seeing maybe up to 30% positive on pre-employment.
Well, I think you were dealing with security officers now.
That's right. It's
so
different
you are
population.
dealing with a different, set of
Hopefully a
people.
slightly better population.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now
so
we,
you're
we
talking
look-
about just the average employee in any given business may have 30%, at any one time, 30% of them may have used or been under the influence of drugs.
Well, I think that's in the old days. I think random testing has changed a lot of things, and that's really only applies to DOT governed and law enforcement, and nuclear regular, and it's fairly narrow in its application.
Oh, okay.
But that's had that. What it did was it unleashed the tools, and up until 1988, there was nothing really there, and we had the Drug Free Workplace Act. That didn't say you should test, but it said you can test. That was good. DOT rules came in, at least it said for their population, you must test under certain circumstances, and for cause being one. Most employers have recognized that adds to their tool chest.
Yeah.
When somebody's engaging in misconduct, now, when we go back, and I've worked with Paul for years, and we look at when we assess a case for risk, we can come up with a fairly simple way, low, moderate, high risk of imminent danger. And there's other ways of putting it, but that's a pretty standard way. If we go back and look at what I would call low behavior, low risk, it's still important. Aggressive, belligerent, intimidating, profane. We look at what we call low risk behavior. That's overwhelmingly substance related. That's drug and alcohol behavior.
Really, on the low end, it's still
In my opinion, yeah. If we go back, what do we test for? We don't test because I think somebody's under the influence of marijuana or cocaine. We test that they're impaired. Now, I've been testifying for a number of years as an expert witness in both public and private sector. Impairment, and the way I define it, is they're not safe, effective, or appropriate. And that's been really accepted in the cases I've testified in. What's appropriate for this workplace? Not defined by the employer. We all have that guy, Bubba, and we're saying he's been kind of screwy for years.
Right.
Now, I don't care what's normal for him. I don't care what's normal for Pat Prince. I would care what's appropriate for this workplace as defined by the employer. And cursing, yelling, intimidating, throwing things around the workroom, kicking trash cans, threatening to kill somebody, that's inappropriate.
Of course, now the problem is in a studio, that's completely appropriate behavior. Literally.
Yes.
No,
Well,
I'm not kidding.
here's
I'm not
my
kidding.
here's my studio story.
I'm not kidding. It
15
is.
years ago, I got a call from one of the studios, and one of their nurses had said, Pat, we saw you do this training on stuff. We'd like you to come in and do some stress training. And I said, really, what's going on? So we noticed between especially Thanksgiving and New Year's, we have a lot of absenteeism. We have a lot of poor performance. We got a lot of issues, and we think people are stressed out. And I said, it sounds like drugs. He says, oh, no, I know our people do drugs. This is a studio. We expect them to. They're creative. I'm going, well, okay, look, I'm a consultant. I'll come in and do the training for you. But it was substance related. It was huge.
So is that an objective standard? Is it what the employer believes is appropriate for his workplace? Or do you have to make it subjective and say, no, I get that backwards. It's a subjective standard for the employer to say, this is my place, I say what's appropriate. Because in a studio, running around acting crazy is completely normal, and so that standard may be different. So if you're going to do for cause or for random testing,
Again, the employer is part of defining what's normal. People run around, get a little crazy.
They do have some rights in that still, the employer.
The employer has a lot of rights.
Okay.
I've worked with longshoremen. I've worked with Teamsters. I've worked with electrical workers represented by EBW. The one thing I have been most gratified by is whether it's a union environment or not, people want an environment where they can come to work, do their job, go home. They don't want to be cursed and yelled at. They don't want to have stuff thrown at them. They don't want to be treated like dirt. Now, not all people cursing and yelling are under the influence, but in my opinion, inappropriate behavior is inappropriate. And if we get a positive drug test, we go down one avenue. If it's negative, we go to another. If we don't drug test, we don't do anything typically and let it get worse.
So this sounds, I think most people would think this is, the drug test is the last part of the equation. It's really the start. And you're saying that behavior, let's call it weird behavior. It's a simple way to say it, right? Not normal. Do you think that gives people, for lack of a better term, probable cause is not the right thing to say, but
let's go reasonable cause.
Let's give them reasonable cause to say, you know what, you're acting kind of strange. Who would act that way unless your behavior is altered by a chemical?
And then what we do is we go, it's not safe, it's not effective, it's not appropriate in this environment.
And that's enough teeth to execute a for cause. See, I think a lot of definitions of for cause are, like we've had, you're standing in the guard booth and the guy reeks like marijuana. That's pretty clear for cause.
That's quite reasonable.
Although I've had that argued, right? I've had it
Sure.
argued.
Yeah.
But you're suggesting that employers really can say, you know what? Something's wrong, dude. Let's get in here and pee in the bottle and start the process that way.
Reasonableness is defined as with two people with similar experience, background, education, training, considering the same facts or evidence, come to the same belief.
Yeah.
Two levels of supervision, considering the same behavior. And by the way, subjective doesn't make it bad. Everything is subjective.
It's true.
I'm okay with subject. That's why we hire managers. I want their subjective experience. I trust their subjectivity. Now, I've never seen for-cause drug testing abused. I got to tell you, there's a lot of other ways to mess with folks. If somebody's acting in a way that's not safe, not effective, not appropriate, drug test. Now, a lot of things can cause people to be unsafe. Stress, medical, psychological. There's things. All right. If they're negative, we'll still pursue what caused the inappropriate behavior. If they're positive, well, we have another avenue.
But if we're going to get a 40% hit
on
drugs at the first level, let's do it.
Let's
Back
do
in a
it.
minute on Security Guy Radio.
Hi, this is Ozzy Osbourne. For many years, you know I've had a drink problem and I'm trying to battle that problem every single day. But one thing I don't drive my car when I'm drinking. I get someone to drive me. Do not drink and drive. It's the stupidest thing. If you drink, just don't drive. Not only are you going to hurt yourself, you may hurt some other person, and you wouldn't want that on your conscience, would you?
A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Transportation, RAD, the National Association of Broadcasters, and the Ad Council.
At highway speeds, the average text takes your eyes off the road for about 5 seconds. That's enough time to travel the length of a football field. Stop texts, stopwrecks.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
While cutting molding with a 12-inch dual compound miter saw, while holding a newborn baby in your arms, when face-to-face with a congregation of alligators, with the ball in your hands and the entire freaking season on the line.
There are a million places you'd never consider texting, so why would you do it while driving? NASCAR driver Casey Kane here, asking you to please stop the text, and together we can stop the wrecks.
Brought to you by the Ad Council and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Get the message at stoptextstopwrecks.org.
7,000 high school students drop out every school day. That's one every 26 seconds. So here's a 26-second message of encouragement.
Hey, I'm Matt. I know, sometimes you think no one cares if I finish high school, right? Well, I do. Me and thousands of people you've never even met. Okay, here's the thing. When you graduate, you have better opportunities to make more money, have a cool job, just have a better life. So the next time you need a little support, a little motivation, just know there are a whole lot of shoulders for you to lean on. So stay in school and graduate.
Do you have 26 seconds to convince a student to stay at their desk? Now you can share your message of support at boostup.org. We can keep students in school. Visit boostup.org and take the first step. Brought to you by the U.S. Army and the Ad Council.
Tropicana Bakery and Cuban Cafe. Come and experience our sweet tradition of sweets, pastries, and incredibly delicious Cuban food. At Tropicana, we offer a bohemian, nostalgic-like atmosphere. In Spanish, we say, es la hora de tertulia de café, which is the moment of drinking coffee and having a great time with friends and family. At Tropicana Bakery and Cuban Cafe, we have an array of exquisite coffees. We have an array of desserts, of pastries, empanadas, sandwiches, and Cuban food. Come to Tropicana Bakery and be blown away by the Caribbean-like atmosphere and flavor profile. Tropicana Bakery and Cuban Cafe is located in the city of Downey. The address is 10218 Paramount Boulevard, virtually on the corner of Paramount and Florent.
Security Guy Radio, Truck Harold. Hello, Mr. Patrick Prince, workplace violent consultant extraordinaire, the guy,
me.
the
There
guy
you
in the
go.
biz. So, just a quick review. We're talking about, in the first segment, the history of workplace violence and how, really, in the 90s, people weren't really sure what to do about it. We've gotten better at it now. You're suggesting drug testing is the first place to really kind of start, because if somebody starts acting wacky, it's easy to say, you know what, that behavior to me doesn't seem proper. You must be on drugs. Let's do a test. And if we hit those people with the drug test very early on, and we catch 40 to 60% of the people who are going to test positive, we're done. We're really done.
Makes a big difference.
He's fired. And by the way, I've always found that terminating people fairly goes a long way. The guy knows he's not going to be able to work there
with
if he's
respect.
on drugs.
I mean,
and
that's
respect.
That's the biggest thing. And yeah, from what I've seen, I mean, that doesn't take place a lot of the times.
So I'm reviewing, so we can kind of, as a listener goes through this, they can kind of see in their mind how we're building a workplace violence program. We really are.
And I think, one of the nice things, in my opinion, about where we've come in the last 20 years, workplace violence prevention fits into a lot of other things. It fits into our EEO training. We don't treat people disrespectfully, inappropriately, unfairly. Now, some folk, just because I say you're treating me bad doesn't mean it's so. And we got a lot of folks who claim I'm being harassed because you're being asked to work.
Yeah.
So just because I say I'm being harassed doesn't make it so. However, if I truly believe it, let's pay attention to it. And if we can fix the conditions, let's do it. If we can't, then we better pay attention. What is this person going to do? Why do they truly believe that they've been so harmed? And what are they going to do to protect themselves? So I think we start to integrate workplace violence into effective leadership, communication skills. I worked a shooting a number of years ago, 1995, one of the more extraordinary events, where a fella had actually shot and killed 4 of his supervisors. He put the gun in the pocket of his coveralls and was leaving the facility. Later, he's interviewed in jail and was asked, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I was going to leave, but I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of dying on their premises." But as he was leaving, from the loading dock comes another supervisor, been on a cigarette break. The fella takes the gun out of his pocket, puts it in the man's forehead, and said words to the effect of, "I just killed 4 of the supervisors. I should kill you. But you always treated me okay.
Yeah.
You were fair to me."
I think that's a big component. Are there numbers, studies, statistics on the correlation between the shooting and, be it a distorted view of how a person's treated, still there's some reality in how they're treated?
Yeah, again, this is something I say a lot, and I think the data would support. A lot of what we do is anecdotal. We don't really know because a lot of these things aren't really publicized well enough. I like to think that if we were to go back and look at the single most significant element that workplace and school shootings have in common, people feel they're treated unfairly.
That's my gut.
And it's what they feel.
Yes, how they feel. Now, again, because they say it doesn't make it so, but now there's other issues. Depression is probably another issue. There's a lot of factors. But if somebody truly feels treated unfairly, they're going to act out on it. Then just as you said earlier about if you have to let somebody go, be decent, be fair. If it's extremely explicit, you have violated this policy. This is not as if we're trying to ruin your life.
Right.
It goes a long way. So I think we need to look at how people present. The people who take umbrage at everything. You're harassing me. I just asked you to show up on time. You're singling me out. Well, no, I just asked you to turn in your timesheet. I know when you get that pushback of management, those things should start to create some concern.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then we start to figure out, what do we do? This gets back to the 90s. One of the challenges, we had all or nothing. We put them on enemy leave and we get an eval, or we leave them alone. Now we're saying if all we have is all or nothing, we're in trouble. So let's start looking at other options. Early in the process, we can look at everything from management consulting. How do you supervise the supervisor? How do you coach? How do we look at work group interactions? We can even use EAP referrals. There's a number of tools. Later on, the high risk, I'm going to tell you right now, sometimes the best we can do is put additional security on the premises. We can surveil what they do when they leave our facility. We can follow them for a period of time, hopefully until they get another job and get fired from it, and they're mad at them more than us.
Yeah.
Right.
But early on, and this is over simplistic, early on, I think it's an HR opportunity. Later, it's almost exclusively security, and the truth is most cases are in between. It's that relationship between HR and security that makes us safe.
Do you find that HR doesn't really have the training? I mean, it sort of amazes me sometimes that I go and see an HR department, and they've got all the qualifications but they've never done any training in violence in the workplace.
Yeah,
it astounds me.
It is remarkable because the truth is, they're usually the first point of contact.
Yeah.
They are doing, whether they call it that or not, they're doing triage. They hear things, they get reports, and I'm interested in the person who files multiple complaints about being treated unfairly, the person who has other performance issues, the person who has multiple counseling for not working well with others. I got a call from this company in South Carolina just a couple of weeks ago where they have a fella who people around him don't want to sit near him. And when HR finally was asking some people what's going on here, one of the men who sit next to him says, I don't want to be the first one he shoots when he comes in. That's a big deal.
That's
and mind you, it had to have gone a long time. So HR hears this, and HR says, well, what do we do? And so back to your original question. HR often is under trained. I think they need to recognize how powerful their impact is on the workplace.
I think that HR, I disagree slightly. I think HR are the best people.
Oh, I think they're the best. I think we need to train them more.
To recognize it.
Yeah.
I think they recognize it.
I think most people, most of them do recognize it.
I think they don't know what to do after that.
Yeah.
Well, that's my opinion. And here's what I used to do. I always wanted to be the first guy shot because I couldn't live with my employees getting shot below me. I had an open door policy. People have my cell phone. They have my home number. And I had people call me up and bitching at 3 o'clock in the morning about how they didn't get their uniform pants. And guess what? That's fine with me. I let them vent. And I think there's some mitigation here. I think this really does work. That if you can address these grievances that people have and let them vent and keep it flowing and have an honest exchange, it does something. And then if you're fair about your response, another thing I used to do, well, you did this too. If you're writing somebody up that's starting to behave poorly and their behavior is not good, I have them write themselves out. Tell me what happened. They cannot come back and be unfair, feel I was unfair when they wrote down what they did. I agree with it. I sign off on it, and I say, what would you do if you were me? What would your penalty be? I think I would fire you. I'm going to have to fire you. And guess what? They get it.
Right.
So there's all kinds of things like that you can do on a interpersonal level.
Well, and that's respect as
It's
well.
all respect.
So you're making them understand what
you're not lying to them.
instead of
You're
just saying
respecting
you got
them. They get it. And I always felt that, if they're going to shoot me, I wanted to know about it.
Right.
I want to know if you're really pissed at me. Don't tell me everybody else you're pissed at me.
Well, here's the good news. This is kind of getting off, but a lot of times what we'll do is we'll try to make sure that if somebody's angry, they're angry at the company. Or we're going to, instead of making the first level supervisor the bad guy, I'm going to push it up the chain.
How do you shift it from being the supervisor to the company?
Well,
of a policy or something?
Part of it is when we do the termination interview. Part of it is when we do the severancing, is that we really look at them and say, look, here's the policy. Here's the direction that we've been given. And where possible, I'd rather have a manager they don't know come in the room and say, I know your name because it's on the org chart, but I've never gone up that high.
That's a good point.
And have that person say, based on the information I have, based on our policy, based on your own admissions, here's what we're going to do. Now, some folks go off well into the night because they know it's right. Some folks, it doesn't matter how well we treat them, are going to be a concern. But it's easier to see them if we do all those other things, as Paul mentioned.
You have to have an exit interview to really do the evaluation. And I think a lot of people sometimes I just heard of a case. I forget who was telling me. They called a guy on the phone and terminated him on the phone because they're afraid of him.
I've seen that done.
Because they're afraid of him.
As the funniest thing, and here's where I think HR and security is ultimately the relationship that counts. I got a call a little while ago from a security company that done some consulting with, and they said one of our clients called us at 9:30 saying they want additional security because they're going to fire a guy at 11. Now, he's already been put off an admin leave. They're going to fire him over the phone. They'd like you to listen in on the phone while they fire him and do your threat assessment. And I said, I'm good. I'm not that good. And I said, let's catch our breath. Let's slow the process down. If we can fire him at 11, we can fire him tomorrow at 11. And what I would hope would happen is maybe 3 months earlier when he got his first performance review, when he was first counseled by HR that this is not acceptable behavior, that's when security gets in the loop. That's when that relationship starts to share their eyes on this guy.
Who's the team? I'm in my experience, it's HR, it's security, it's the department manager, lawyers.
Okay.
Sometimes they muddle that up.
Here's where we run into some problems. Right. About 2011 October, as is American Society for Industrial Security, partnered with SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management, published national guidelines on workplace violence programs. I was one of the many authors of that document. Throughout it talks about having a multidisciplinary team What we didn't do an adequate job in that document, and what a lot of folks don't get, is there really, in the real world, 2 teams. We have our kind of corporate-wide oversight team. I want security, HR, legal, line management, executive, labor relations probably, and there'll be a couple other key players that look at overall policy considerations, do some overall case monitoring, and look at trends within the company. But when something goes sideways, when an employee at your plant makes a threat, acts in a threatening way, does something on the threat team, I want security, I want HR, I want management. You know what? Call me up, have a threat assessment professional, and maybe that's the team. Because when things start to get hot, a small team works much more effectively than a big team.
Absolutely.
And what we get caught up in is, okay, wait a minute, we got to bring all 19 people together. No, forget it. We're not going to have any kind of successful resolution.
And you have no time to do that.
No.
You got to act. And we'll talk about acting as opposed to sitting and doing nothing when we get back from our break on Security Guy Radio.
Hi everybody, this is Getty Lee for RAD. To many of us, drunk driving is something that other people do. Certainly not one of our friends or relatives would do such a thing. When you see someone who's had too much to drink, about to get into a car, urge them to give up the keys and find alternate transportation. Always choose a designated driver. Remember, music lives, you should too.
A public service message brought to you by the U.S. Department of Transportation, RAD, the National Association of Broadcasters, and the Ad Council.
Hello, this is George Foreman. Nothing is as rewarding as making a difference in someone's life. Someone like Nathan, a 4-year-old battling a rare blood disorder. The generosity of a blood donor like you can help save a life, and it only takes about an hour. The American Red Cross encourages you to give the gift of life through blood donation. You can make a difference, donate blood, and encourage your friends, family, and neighbors to give. Call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. That's 1-800-448-3543. And schedule your appointment today. Join me in making a real difference in the lives of kids like Nathan. And visit givelife.org. That's 1-800-448-3543. And givelife.org. And learn more about donating blood.
Los Pollos, home of flavored down-to-the-bone chicken. As we say in Spanish, el sabor hasta el último huesito. At Los Pollos, we serve delicious Cuban/Mexican marinated chicken. We are cooking our chickens in rotisserie ovens to give you a well-seasoned, well-marinated, well-cooked, delicious chicken. We have 3 locations to serve you. In the city of Bell, we are located in 6201 Atlantic Avenue on the corner of Randolph and Atlantic. In the city of East LA, we are located on 5161 Pomona Boulevard on the corner of Atlantic and Pomona Boulevard. And in the city of Downey, we are located on 7940 East Florence Avenue on the corner of Paramount and Florence. Come to Los Pollos and experience the most delicious chicken that you'll ever have the pleasure of eating.
Super Thrive, unique extra life, transplanting, and maintenance. Impossibilities made easy. 1,800 60 to 75-year-old trees dug up from grounds of 20th Century Fox Studios, stockpiled in weather for 2 years, replanted along city streets. The landscape architect and contractor reported not one sick or dead tree at any time. Only Super Thrive could have done this, or even approached it. Super Thrive. Ask for it by name at your local garden center or nursery.
If you're an entrepreneur and business person, you know that without advertising, a terrible thing happens. Nothing. Increase your local, national, or worldwide sales by advertising right here on Adrenaline Radio. We have a sales rep that can custom tailor a campaign that will benefit both you and your business. Call 562-945-6469 before your competition does. That's 562-945-6469. Yeah, AdrenalineRadio.com.
Welcome back to Security Guy Radio with Chuck Harrell, Paul Bristow, and Patrick Prince. So, Pat, we want to try and build, I think, let's build a workplace violence team. Let's build a group of people. Let's put it together. Let's show the folks listening on the radio how we get this done, because my frustration's always been that security knows what they're doing. They're all, they're all a bunch of ex-cops. They can walk down the street and say, "Oh, that guy's robbing a store, and that guy's going to," we just know that from our training and intuition. But when security walks upstairs to, the guy running facilities who's in charge of security, who doesn't know anything about it and doesn't really care and doesn't want to know about it, and he says, go to HR, and HR says, well, I got to check with legal. It's very hard to get it done. It's hard to get it done. And then when something happens, it's your fault because you didn't get it done. So how do we put together in a corporate environment a team like that, and then how do we get people to act?
Huge questions. We could actually talk for, and this is fun. We could go on for a long time. The first thing we do is we start to make sure people have a common understanding of what we're talking about.
Defining the problem.
Define the problem. When we talk about workplace violence prevention, we really are looking at creating a safe work environment. We're looking at using a host of tools, whether it's HR initiated early on mostly, security, owned later on mostly, or kind of in between, that we have tools within our tool chest that the company can use to solve problems. And that's what I really think we do, is we tell them we can solve problems.
How do you do that? I mean, through training? Or,
training's always the first part. And, there's a lot.
If you've got a security director sitting out there and he's got this problem, I mean, what does he do?
Well, I would suggest you get your security director, you bring in your HR director, you bring in somebody from the executive suite who can make decisions, and you say, let's articulate what the issues are. I generally get called in after something horrific happens.
Exactly, right.
It's a very ugly thing, but when there's a major shooting, my business goes through the roof. My favorite clients, though, are the ones who call me in when there's nothing going on, saying, I don't want it to happen. I don't want to go down that path. So let's bring in legal, let's bring in HR, let's bring in security, let's bring in some of your line managers who understand the business, and let's start talking about how it is that this team can help them solve problems that interfere with productivity, interfere with people's ability to focus on the job, which actually costs the company dearly. Low-risk behavior may not be homicidal, but we pay a lot of money every year for a quote-unquote hostile work environment, for people not willing to come to work, for a lot of things. So we start to articulate how it is that we can help the company.
Who's the salesperson on that? Security?
Well, I think security is often going to be the one who opens the door.
They drive it.
Ultimately, I think HR owns it.
Okay.
I think that ultimately, and we're seeing a trend in some of the major companies out there, this should be an HR-driven kind of activity, because if we do our job correctly, they start to see problems early when they're not that big a deal. It's easier, not easy, but easier to deal with something when it's a behavior of concern as opposed to a threat. HR owns that. So we start to identify who in the company owns this, and I think HR is very, very good at that. The other thing that HR does bring to the table is a lot of times, I've been a reserve officer for many years. I would like to say, well, let's arrest this one, let's kick him out. And HR says, we can't. And they're right. Okay? Then I want to hear what HR says. I want to understand how we can otherwise administratively deal with it, because if the only tool I have is dismissal or leave them alone, again, we've hurt the company.
There's a question. What's the motivator for getting these people involved? Is it liability? Is it money if something does happen?
You're trying to scare them?
Or does it because the company actually cares about their employees, which isn't always the case?
Well, the answer should be hopefully all the above, right? Liability always gets people. The fact that, as is Insurance, published these standards, every company should be sitting down asking themselves, do we meet at least the minimum?
Right.
And the minimum requires
Do you think
training.
people know about those standards at this point?
Probably not. I've gone into environments where the HR directors I know are members of SHRM. They have no clue. I've dealt with security types who aren't really sure. We need to make sure that everyone knows there's at least a minimum level that every company should be adhering to. And by the way, it's not overwhelmingly costly.
Right.
The consultants who are trying to charge you an arm and a leg for the service are taking your money. Now, on the other hand, don't buy cheap stuff. You get what you paid for. Right. So what we want to do is start to show folks violence prevention fits into their company. It fits into effective communication, EEO-related kind of decreasing cost. It fits into all the other initiatives they've already done. If they do it correctly, it enhances what they're already doing, as opposed to here's another program we got to stick on top of what we're doing. it's not that overwhelming. It's not that costly.
And I think from what you said earlier on, it's actually a morale issue as well, because the employees want to feel safe at their where they're working.
Yeah, I had a meeting last week with the manager who, frankly, is afraid to fire this fella because she's afraid he's going to come back and shoot her. She's said it. So, and I understand. I appreciate that. But I respect her concern. The question we had to bring up is, if you're afraid and you're the manager, how do you think the people around him feel?
Yeah.
How much money are you going to pay on their stress claims? How much are you going to pay on the fact that they don't come into work? We appreciate your fear. We appreciate the concern you have. Now, how do we take care of you?
You know, that's an interesting approach. If she's the victim and she's in HR, she's blinded by the facts and she's paralyzed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you remember this. We used to get the phone call that says, I need a box on the 5th floor. And the box meant somebody's going, right? And I have been asked by HR to do terminations, given company authority to say, I want you to go fire that guy. We're going to shift the hostility, like you said earlier, off to the security department. And if the security department's firing you, it's because we think there's something going on. People can debate that that's a good strategy. It may or may not be in all situations, but I think sometimes they understand, like you just said, they recognize the threat, but they're afraid.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to do about it. And the other thing I think is you get into this territorial thing, right? HR thinks that they run security, and security thinks they run janitorial, and janitorial doesn't run anybody. I mean, it's just the hierarchy, right? One thing I got to give Disney credit for, and Fox to some degree, was that if I picked up the phone and called HR, they were my internal consultant. They seldom told me what to do, but they advised me what to do. And we worked as a team much better that way. Much, much better. If you're going to bring up a threat mitigation team you want to build at the office, it has to be no pissing contest, right? Everybody's got to work together on it and not, you can own it collectively, but then, of course, at the end, somebody has to be the decision maker, and this is where we fall down. Nobody's the decision maker. Nothing happens. There's no act, and then we have somebody come back and shoot.
I think at Fox it was very good. Apart from occasionally you'd get an HR person that hadn't pushed it up the line anywhere.
They just held it, right?
They just held it. They sat with it, and then all of a sudden,
So is HR going to pull the trigger in your model? They're going to be the decision maker?
So if I were to come into a company, you know what I like to do is I like to have 4 or 5 people to meet with first. I want to meet with security, I want to have HR, and I want to have someone in senior management, and let's just sit down and talk about if a company is only looking at preventing homicide. A lot of times say it's not going to happen here, and thank God they're probably right. We're really looking at that whole range of behavior that distresses the company and costs them dearly. So our program is not just to stop homicide, although certainly that's our bottom line. Let's stop all those other kinds of behaviors that fall within this course of conduct that are relevant, and HR will get on board in security. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, if it's an internal threat, a coworker, an employee, maybe even a customer, I want HR to take the lead. If it's an external threat, I want security to take the lead.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So before I walk out of any assessment, I want to know who owns this. Who's going to monitor? Who's going to follow? If you go back and look at Virginia Tech, there's been so much written about that. But you know the failure of Virginia Tech? Every one of the people that touched Sung Hui Cho did their job.
Right,
Nobody was designed to manage and follow up.
Nobody took ownership.
No took ownership, and no one followed it for the long term.
And I'll tell you what, if you don't take ownership and do something as the company, part of the company, the employees will do something. And case in point, there's a wacky guy in the workplace. Everybody's afraid of him. I have had employees tell me, listen, I got a CCW from so-and-so, and I pack and I carry because that guy over there is a nut, and nobody's doing anything about it. So you're going to have more violence potential.
That's right, because
weapons in the workplace because people are going to take care of themselves and their own family first.
And they may not have the right tools.
That's correct. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what do you think about policies? You hear so many people say, well, we've got a policy against that.
Policy is a piece of paper. Yeah, I worked a shooting where a guy said, I can't believe this person shot these people. We have a policy preventing it, prohibiting it. And he signed it. Yeah. Now, policies are nice, and I've seen companies write a policy and they move on. No, you know what? I'd rather have a process.
Yeah.
If I can only have one, I want a process. And that process is, if something's going on, call HR. Or, you know what? Call security. I'm okay with either one of those because I know that they're going to call the other. And as long as security and HR talk to each other, solve problems, bring people to the table, we're in a good spot.
We are out of time. That's unbelievable.
Wow.
It went by so fast. Pat,
very quick.
Tell us how we get a hold of you.
Well, you can always reach me at workplaceviolenceconsultants.com, at info@PrincePhelps, or you know what? You can always email me directly, PatrickPrince at sbcglobal.net.
And what's your personal phone number?
310-454-0926.
Or send me an email at chuck@securityguyradio.com, and we'll forward the information to Pat for you. Pat, thank you very much. I know you're very busy, and we really appreciate you coming in.
It really has been a pleasure.
We'll see you next week on Security Guy Radio. Tally ho.
Bye.
Cheers.